To determine the optimal number of topics, we can use something called coherence scores. To start using these, we'll just need to import the function. We're also going to be importing the matplotlib as we want to do some plots of these coherence scores to determine the optimal number of topics. So we're going to create a for loop where we're going to iterate through different numbers of topics and then put these coherence scores into a list for us to inspect. So the first step is to create two empty lists, one for our coherence values and one for our models. We then specify the minimum topics we want to run and the maximum topics. Here we're using the minimum topics as 2 and the max as 11, but these can be any numbers that you like. We then create our for loops. So for num topics I in the range minimum topics to maximum topics plus 1 to make sure that that maximum number is included. We then create a model where the number of topics changes for each of the runs in the for loop, starting with the minimum topics and going all the way up to the maximum topics. This model is then appended to our model list if we want to check it later. We then run a coherence model. This takes a few arguments: our model, our original text, which is our articles, our dictionary, and the coherence. So here we're using C_v. These are our coherence values. We then append these coherence values to our emptied list. And we can get the coherence values using coherence model.get_coherence. Once we've run through this for loop and we have a list of coherence values, we can plot this to determine the optimal number of topics. So we do plt.plot, and then on our x-axis we're having a range from the minimum topics to the maximum topics plus 1. And then on the y-axis is the coherence scores. We're looking for a high coherence score, so when we plot this figure, we can see that the highest value for the coherence score is when we have 3 topics. We can then create our final model using 3 topics. So we create our final num topics, which is 3, and then we just create another LSI model using this final num topics. We can then print out our results and inspect how the different words for each of the topics comes out. It's important to note as well that sometimes the most mathematically accurate number of topics isn't always going to be the most valuable for your business. So for example, you can see here that if we had a number of topics set to 11, this would also have quite a high coherence score. However, 11 topics might be quite difficult when you're explaining to stakeholders what the different topics mean and what they're about. So sometimes it is worth manually checking how the different topics look when you're using a different number of topics. And you can use the coherence scores as well as your intuition and your knowledge of the project that you're working on and the business that you're working in and the people that you're working with to influence the number of topics that you decide to go with in the end. If you choose a value that's not the most optimal in terms of something like a coherence score, but it makes a lot more sense to you and your business, that's absolutely fine. You can go with that and no one's going to pull you up on that unless it is a really incoherent model. So it's just about finding that balancing act. But once you've run this a few times, you'll definitely get the hang of where that balance lies.